a soldier who was 81 years old went to court, wearing his Bronze Star, and got fined for it. But the judge didn't realize that someone in the room had a sharper legal mind than anybody else. There was a slight fragrance of lemon oil and old books in the room. The courthouse in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was erected in 1927, has seen a lot of drama. But on that Thursday morning, no one thought that the spark would come from a man with a beautifully pressed gray blazer and shiny brown Oxfords. Thurston Rayner went in slowly but straight, clutching a tattered leather folder and displaying his Bronze Star on his chest. As he walked to the front, the metal shone in the light from the ceiling. Each step was well planned. He had the calm demeanor of someone who has lived in situations where silence may mean life or death. The noise in courtroom 6B stopped when he walked by. A few others glanced at the ribbon on his breast and recognized it. Most people didn't know the man's name, but something about him made them sit up straight. After then, the voice arrived. Sharp, straightforward, and almost rehearsed. Mr. Rayner, Judge Celeste Grantham stated as she adjusted her spectacles without looking up, "Take off the medal before we start, or you'll be fined for contempt. This is a courtroom, not a parade." The room appeared to stop. Thurston didn't say anything. He gazed at the medal once, and then back to the bench. He responded, "I'm not here to put on a show, Your Honor," in a calm voice. Grantham leaned back and said, "This medal is part of who I am. I wear it like I wear my name." She was in her early 60s and was renowned for being quite rigorous about manners and being no nonsense in court. "That's not important," she said sharply. "Personal items, insignias, or symbols are not allowed unless the court says so. You will find $200. Let's move on." There were whispers from the seats. A woman in her 40s wearing a blue denim jacket said, "That ain't right," to no one in particular. Thurston didn't say anything. He didn't let out a sigh. He opened his folder quietly and looked over the pages. He looked up when the court asked him whether he had a lawyer. "No, ma'am. I'll be representing myself." You could sense the change. Small but genuine. The lawyer for the other side, a young guy in a fancy suit who had introduced himself as Wesley Brandt, grinned slightly and murmured something to his paralegal. Most likely thought it would be an easy win. Grantham lifted her eyebrows. "You're choosing to go without a lawyer in a civil property dispute worth more than $40,000? "Yes, ma'am," she said. She blinked once. "Okay," she said. "Let's get started," said Dean Melling, the plaintiff and a property developer, with two aides by his side. He was at least 30 years younger than Thurston, and seemed like a man who was used to breaking the rules and getting away with it. Melling's team had asked the court to take a 6-foot-wide strip of property behind Thurston's little house. Thurston had planted peach trees on this site over 20 years ago. Based on a fresh study, Melling said it was his. Wesley Brandt moved up to the front with confidence. "Today will show that Mr. Rayner's trees are on our client's property and need to be cut down right away." Thurston peered over his spectacles and then back to his folder. "I'd like to ask that I be allowed to present evidence right after Mr. Brandt's opening." Judge Grantham was already angry. "We'll follow orders." "You'll get your chance," Thurston said with a nod. "Understood." But there was something in his voice that made it clear he wasn't being sarcastic or passive. Brandt started by utilizing technical terms. Landmarks, GPS coordinates, and statutory codes. He had pictures, schematics, and even drone shots. It seemed to be airtight. He finished by adding, "We think this is a clear case of encroachment, Your Honor." Judge Grantham stared at Thurston. "Your answer?" Thurston said, standing still and serene with only 3 sheets of paper in his hand. "Your Honor, before I get into boundary law, I'd like to ask the court to look over the petition's chain of title, especially from 1992 to 2003. It looks like something is missing." Brandt rolled his eyes. Grantham didn't say anything. "Go ahead," she said. Thurston held out the papers, which were 2 pages from the Tulsa County Recorder's office. One shows the transfer of the deed from the original developer to Mr. Melling's holding company. The other shows an easement that was set up in 1998 that lets me access that exact strip of land for maintenance. He moved forward and gave them to the bailiff. The judge's face turned serious. Brandt leaned across his table and whispered something quickly to his helper. But the room didn't move. Everyone looked at the man with the medal. Judge Grantham read the easement agreement in quiet. Her lips squeezed together as she turned the second page and read every phrase twice. Slowly, she glanced up. Mr. Brandt, did you know about this easement? Brandt got up, adjusted his tie, and spoke with a well-calibrated amount of arrogance. Thurston didn't say anything as the lawyer said, Your Honor, the document looks real, but we don't think it's important. Easements don't automatically give ownership rights. He waited. The silence between them seemed to be full with energy. He then moved forward again. May I clarify that point, Your Honor? Grantham said with a modest nod. Go ahead. Respectfully, Thurston started, I'm not claiming ownership to the easement. I'm saying that I've been taking care of the strip of land in question for more than 20 years without anyone else claiming it. Under Oklahoma's adverse possession statute, Title 12, Section 93. That's enough to make a valid claim of ownership, since I've paid property tax and taken care of the land as if it were mine. The courtroom didn't move, but it leaned in. Brandt laughed too loudly. That's a pretty good legal argument for someone who is representing himself. Thurston said as he turned his head, Mr. Brandt, I spent 5 years in Vietnam, came back to a country that barely looked me in the eye, and earned my law degree while working nights and taking care of 3 kids. Don't mistake quiet for ignorance. The court reporter's fingers stopped for a second. Judge Grantham didn't say anything. But something about her quiet had altered. Brandt faltered. Your Honor, I object to the personal commentary. Grantham responded gently, then with greater weight, sustained. But noted, she said again, this time to Thurston, you're saying adverse possession. Do you have tax records, photos, or affidavits to back up your claim? I do, he said as he opened a different folder and gave the bailiff 3 sets of papers. Photos from 2002, signed statements from my neighbors, some of whom are here today, and 10 years' worth of tax records that include assessments for that strip. It was too much, and he knew it, not in a showy way, but in a way that made everyone in the room know that I was ready for war. This time, not with bullets. Grantham looked at the pictures. Some pictures showed Thurston as a child holding a spade and standing next to little peach trees. Some people had kids, maybe even grandkids, plucking ripe fruit and stuffing their mouths. Brandt moved about in his chair, feeling uncomfortable. The judge looked at the people in the room. Is Mrs. Gentry here? Said an older woman with a cane and a flowery scarf. Stood up slowly. Yes, Your Honor. You signed this affidavit? I did. Thurston's been taking care of those trees for a long time, longer than that new building has been there. I remember when he planted them. We watched them grow together. Thank you, Grantham remarked. She didn't grin, but her voice had gotten a bit softer. Brandt struggled to get back on track. We are ready to bring in a professional surveyor to make the parcel dimensions clear, Grantham said. Your Honor, the law is more important than feelings. Grantham didn't seem convinced. Not yet, she said, turning back to Thurston. Mr. Rayner, where did you go to law school? There it was. Thurston put his spectacles back on. I graduated from Winfield College of Law in Arkansas in 1976. The school closed in 1992 because it ran out of money, but we made some great lawyers before that. The audience fell silent. Then a man in the rear, who seemed like an older black veteran because of his headgear, clapped once. Only once. Then he put his hands back in his lap. Grantham didn't tell him off. She looked down and then up. I have to admit, Mr. Rayner, I didn't expect this. I know, he answered. Not with pride, but as a fact. But what happened next changed the whole tone of the hearing in a way that no one saw coming. For the first time that morning, Judge Grantham leaned back in her chair. She didn't put her arms over her body, did not grab her gavel. She merely looked at the man in front of her. This 81-year-old veteran somehow made a simple property case into something that everyone in the room had to see. Mr. Rayner, she continued in a calm voice, please go on with your case. Thurston nodded slightly and proceeded to the side of the courtroom, where he laid out 3 hand-drawn maps on the presentation board next to the clerk's table. The pictures weren't very nice. They had sharper marks on them and pencil notes. But they were right. This first one, he continued, is the original survey from 1996. You can see here, he added, pointing with a cap pen, that the border in question cuts just short of the rear drainage ditch, which lines up exactly with the base of the peach trees. Brandt squinted and moved closer. This isn't an official document, Thurston said. No, it isn't, he said. It's based on my own notes and records from community meetings when that property was being built. I was on the neighborhood zoning board until 2001. But the second one, he said, flipping to the next sheet, is an official survey recorded with the county in 2005. And this is where it gets strange. Grantham narrowed her eyes. Go on, Thurston said, touching the corner of the map. Brandt broke in and said, in this version, the boundary line moves 6 feet east, taking the land I've been taking care of for years. But there was no change in the county filings. I or my neighbors were never told about it. There was no hearing. It just shifted. This is just a guess, Your Honor, Thurston said. No, it's procedural, Thurston said. And I'd like to ask for a judicial review of this boundary change because there wasn't enough public notice, Grantham said. Mr. Brandt? Brandt took a moment to think. His face said everything. I'll need to talk to our records team. You do that, she added in a chilly voice. The gallery remained silent save for a single cough at the rear. In the meantime, I'll accept Mr. Rayner's request. The court will do an internal review of the zoning changes made in 2005. Then someone mumbled, Damn. Brandt looked at Dean Melling, the developer, whose face had gone from confident to rigid. He leaned down and spoke something to Brandt in a low voice. The lawyer nodded, wrote something down on a legal pad, and rose up again. We asked for a continuance, Your Honor. No, Thurston answered clearly. 6 months have passed since this case was filed. You had time. You brought in a drone and tried to bulldoze the trees I planted when your client was still in middle school. No more delays. Grantham looked at him. She didn't say anything immediately away. Mr. Brandt, she eventually continued, if your client took action to remove or change that land without a final ruling, this court reserves the right to impose penalties. Did anything happen to the trees? Brandt moved again. Some branches may have been cut back to get ready for site testing. But I have pictures, Thurston said, putting up another sheet, taken last week. You can see the stumps of 3 trees that were cut down at the base. Grantham moaned, not the weary type, but the angry sort. Bring those pictures up, he said. She looked at them. Then they turned to Melling. Sir, did you or any of your workers take down these trees? Melling tried to smile. She looked down and then back up. My team was following the project manager's orders, who is on leave. I didn't know what they were doing. Don't insult this court, Melling said, and his smile faded. Got it, Thurston said as he stepped back to the table. He hadn't yelled at all. Hadn't even looked mad. Just steady. That's what made it hurt worse. The hush was louder than any yelling could have been. The judge put her elbows on the bench and steepled her fingers beneath her chin. You're telling me these trees were part of your property maintenance for over 20 years, that you paid taxes, that you have neighbor affidavits, that an unauthorized boundary shift occurred, and that 3 of your trees have been destroyed? Yes, ma'am, Grantham said to the clerk. We'll be looking over all property records from 1996 on. Please call the county registrar's office. In the meantime, this court is putting a temporary stop to any building work on Mr. Melling's land. That hit like a hammer. Melling put his hands up. This is crazy. No, she answered sternly. What's crazy is taking part of someone's land while a hearing is going on. One more outburst and you're out, Melling said as he sat down. Hard. Thurston kept mute. But the tension in the room hadn't even reached its climax. Not yet. By the time the lunch recess was announced, hardly one moved. Judge Grantham stood. The clerk hit the gavel, and folks simply hung around. It seemed like no one wanted to end the spell. This wasn't how courtrooms generally felt. Like something more important was going on. Thurston took his time putting his papers together. Step by step, a lady in the third row leaned over to another and whispered, He's not just some old man. Did you see how he handled those maps? A young black man called Isaiah Winslow, who was a law student watching the court that day, stood still toward the back. He looked at Thurston as if he had just seen a master lesson. Isaiah's dad had been in the military in Iraq, but he never talked about it much, let alone the law. It felt his chest clench to see Thurston command the room, without even raising his voice. The courtroom hummed again as Thurston went toward the corridor. This time, not with mistrust, but with interest. Judge Grantham didn't go back to her chambers straight away. Instead, she told the bailiff to hold everyone for 5 minutes and went into the hallway. At first, she didn't say anything. I just stood there and watched Thurston go through a tattered blue folder. He saw her, but he didn't say anything first. "Where did you say you practiced law, Mr. Rayner?" she said, crossing her arms gently. "Mostly in Veterans Affairs," he said. "I worked as a legal advisor in Kansas City for about 12 years. I helped veterans with discharge upgrade cases, housing appeals, and medical access, as well as a lot of claims that got lost in the system. You never went private. I had offers, but I thought helping people who no one else wanted to listen to was more my speed." Grantham looked down the corridor at Brant and Melling, who were bickering in low voices. She responded gently, "You've done your homework." Thurston smiled politely with half of his mouth. "I always do." There was a little pause. "Why didn't you tell me about your legal background when you got the fine?" she said. He put the papers under his arm. "I didn't think I needed to. The medal shouldn't have been a problem in the first place." She nodded once. It wasn't an agreement, but it wasn't a rejection either. She said, "I'll see you after recess." He softly tilted his head and then went outside. Isaiah couldn't sit still in the courtroom. He turned his friend and whispered quickly, "I looked him up. He's not just a legal advisor. He used to teach. He was a guest speaker at 2 law schools. He wrote a paper on due process in veteran cases that won a state bar award." "No way," his friend remarked. "Way. Dude's a legend, and nobody's been talking about him." But that was the problem. Thurston had never asked anybody to talk about him. Brant worked for a company that sent out news releases after every decision, while Thurston had spent his whole life working in offices with fluorescent lighting and worn-out desks, helping customers fill out forms they didn't understand. Wesley Brant, who was sitting at the plaintiff's table, appeared upset. He looked through his binder as if he thought the solution was hidden between the pages. Melling was pacing and had a flushed face. Melling growled, "Can we count a claim?" "What for?" Brant fired back. "He has tax receipts, documents, neighbors, and the judge on his side," Brant said. "Then discredit him. Find something." He closed his binder. Thurston strolled back in and they both froze. "You think I'm not trying?" At 1 p.m., the court started up again. Grantham came back with a stack of papers that the clerk had given her. She moved her chair around as if she had settled into a new way of thinking. "Okay," she said to start. "We've gotten preliminary confirmation from the Tulsa County Recorder's office that there is no registered amendment to the property boundary line from the original 1996 filing to the 2005 survey used in the plaintiff's submission. That is, at best, an administrative oversight. At worst, it's misrepresentation." Brant stood. "Your Honor, we asked for more time to look into this further." "No," she cut in. "You've had enough time. We're moving on." She looked at Thurston. "You can keep going." He didn't utilize the platform this time. He took a small step forward and said clearly, "Your Honor, I'd like to give my closing argument now. I've given the paperwork and the legal basis. My last point is simple. The law isn't just about lines on a map. It's about responsibility. I took care of that land. I paid those taxes. I followed the process. What they're doing isn't about land. It's about taking without consequence." You could hear a pin drop. But what occurred next, when Thurston questioned the ethics of Melling's permission and the unexpected change in zoning, would make things much more complicated in the courtroom. Thurston fixed his collar and kept his eyes on the judge. His voice didn't get louder. It didn't need to. "I'm submitting a written motion for discovery into how Mr. Melling's zoning permit was approved despite the missing boundary amendment. The signature on the 2005 survey file doesn't match the registrar's records from that year. I had it reviewed by a handwriting analyst 2 weeks ago. He handed a thin document to the bailiff. Judge Grantham's face got darker, but not because he was angry. He was thinking. She gently turned the pages, pausing near the center. She squinted her eyes. The county official listed here is Deborah S. Knorr. She left the office in 2004. This document was filed in January 2005. Grantham said, "You think someone forged something?" Thurston didn't flinch. "I'm saying it needs to be looked into. I'm not accusing anyone without proof, but I've worked in enough bureaucracies to know what it looks like when someone rubber stamps something they shouldn't." Brandt stood up. "Objection. This is hearsay and guesswork." Grantham didn't even glance at him. "It's a request for discovery, not a ruling." "Overruled." The gallery buzzed with activity. Grantham's tone had changed. It was less angry and more clear. She was now listening, not just hearing. Thurston looked at the people in the crowd. "I wasn't going to bring that up today, but since my peach trees are now stumps and I've been fined for wearing the only medal I ever got for doing something right, I thought it was worth putting on the record." The quiet was deafening. Brandt even sat down carefully. Then, out of the blue, the door opened silently and a little voice whispered, "Grandpa?" Everyone turned to see. A girl who looked to be 12 or 13 stood at the rear of the courtroom. She was next to a middle-aged woman in jeans and a sweater. "Sorry, Your Honor," the woman answered immediately. Thurston's expression softened as he waved softly. "We tried to wait, but she wanted to see him. Come here, baby." The girl ran down the aisle and gripped him tightly around the waist. "Did they take the trees?" He put his hand on her back. "Some of them, but they'll grow back. It just takes time and patience." The judge didn't say anything. She looked. Thurston glanced up again. "That girl helped me plant those. That's her history, too." The judge blinked long and then cleared her throat. "Let the record show that Mr. Rayner has raised a serious concern regarding procedural fraud. This court will submit the survey to a forensic analyst within 5 business days. Any further construction on Mr. Melling's site remains frozen." Brandt whispered angrily to Melling, who looked like he wanted to say something but didn't. Then Grantham did something that no one saw coming. "Mr. Rayner," she started slowly, "can you tell me what made you want to be a lawyer in the first place?" Thurston gazed at her for a long time. "Do you really want to know?" "Yes," she responded. He gazed around the courtroom, as if he didn't know where to start. "I came back from Vietnam with shrapnel in my shoulder and a DD 214 full of holes. My benefits were denied. They said I didn't have enough proof. I didn't even have the money for a lawyer. So I went to the public library and sat there day after day, reading the code books and taking notes by hand. It took me 4 years, but I won my appeal." He shifted his weight slightly. "That triumph altered my life. But what truly resonated with me was the queue of other veterans outside the VA office. Men sleeping in their vehicles, and women with infants in strollers being turned away. I thought that if I could help them, I may sleep easier at night." "That's what justice looks like, Mr. Rayner," Grantham said with a nod. "Not all lawyers remember that." He didn't grin, but he did relax a little. "I never forgot." Then the door to the courtroom opened again. This time it was a local reporter, notebook in hand. She didn't interrupt, just stood quietly in the back, listening. But what no one in the room realized was that someone else had been watching this case from afar, and their entrance would change everything. The afternoon sun had shifted, sending narrow beams of light across the wooden floor of courtroom 6B. It had been hours since the case began, but no one asked for a break. No one looked at the clock. The usual tension that settles into a courtroom after long proceedings wasn't there. People leaned forward. They wanted to hear what came next. Judge Grantham reviewed the last of the documents from Thurston's folder. The mood had changed. Her expression no longer carried the detachment of authority, but the intensity of someone trying to catch up. "Mr. Rayner," she said carefully, "you've raised the issue of a forged signature on the 2005 survey. I'll issue a formal review. In the meantime, you mentioned earlier that the developer's permits may be faulty as well." Thurston nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, I did." He moved carefully to the evidence table and put a stack of documents next to the court clerk. 2 months ago, I asked the city for open records. I wanted to view all the applications that Mr. Melling's business sent in for that building project. More specifically, I was seeking for the variance that would let him develop within 5 feet of an existing residential property. That change was never approved. Not in 2019, not in 2020, and not today. Judge Grantham raised her eyebrows and asked, "Are you sure?" He stated, "Only 3 were ever issued for that block in the last 10 years. None of them were for that lot, which means his permits don't allow construction on that stretch. And if they were pushed through anyhow, someone is going to be in a lot of trouble at work." Brandt sprang up so quickly that his chair fell over. "Your Honor, I move to strike these papers. This is not part of the current hearing." Grantham lifted a hand to stop him. "I've heard enough to need to look into this more. Thank you, Mr. Rayner." She looked back down at the papers and flipped through them one by one. "It seems like Mr. Melling's building permits have an old parcel number on them. That should have been caught by the permission office. I'm marking it for the city to look into." Brandt stepped closer to Melling, who was now obviously sweating, and said, "What do we do?" Melling said, "You're the lawyer. Make it right." Brandt swallowed hard and got up again. "Your Honor," he said, "we would like to settle at this point." "Now you want to settle?" Thurston said as he peered over at them. Brandt wasn't sure what to do. "In good faith, I offered you 6 months to settle before you touched a single tree," Thurston said. "You bulldoze them anyhow." Melling jumped in, his voice cracking a little. "Mr. Rayner, I didn't know. My project manager went too far." "You paid for liberties," Thurston fired out. "That land fed my grandsons. That land was the only thing I could still labor with these elderly hands. You believed it was merely dirt since an old guy owned it." Melling's eyes fell to the table. Grantham peered between the two sides. "Mr. Rayner, are you looking for damages?" He stopped and thought about it. "I'm not trying to make anyone go broke," he replied. "I just want them to pay for what they broke and leave the land alone. No agreement, just fixing it." She nodded. "Got it." The door opened again gently, and a lady in a gray blazer strolled in with a municipal government credential. She gave the bailiff a sealed envelope. "Your Honor," the bailiff said, "this just came in from the Tulsa Zoning Review office. Marked as urgent." Grantham opened it, read it, and then read it again. She glanced up, her eyes hardening. "The city has confirmed that the parcel number on Mr. Melling's permits was retired in 2010. These permissions aren't good." A wave of murmurs went through the gallery. Someone threw out a low whistle, but Thurston didn't flinch. He just leaned on the table with both hands and breathed through his nose like a guy whose job was almost done. Grantham turned to Melling and said, "You'll stop all construction right away. You will be responsible for the damage to the trees and all legal costs associated with this hearing. And if additional inquiry shows that documents were changed to get those permits, you might be charged with crime." Melling looked shocked. Brandt sat down hard and didn't say anything. The judge turned to Thurston and asked, "Is there anything else you'd like to add?" "Yes," he answered. "I want the court to write down that I have complete legal ownership of that strip, and I want it filed today." She hit her gavel once, so commanded. But before the judge could end the hearing, someone unexpected raised their hand from the gallery. The room shifted again. The hand that rose from the second row belonged to Isaiah Winslow, the law student who had been watching every moment like his future depended on it. He stood up, nervous but clear-eyed. "Your Honor, may I say something?" Judge Grantham appeared shocked. She paused for a while, then nodded. "Please tell the court who you are." "Isaiah Winslow, a second-year legal student at the Tulsa College of Legal. I am here for my program to see courtrooms." "Go ahead," she said again. Isaiah gulped, looked at Thurston, and then turned to the bench. "I just want to thank this court for letting what happened today happen, because I've been to hearings where folks like Mr. Rayner, people who look like me, get run over. I've seen that more than once. But today, this man taught me more about the law in a few hours than some of my teachers did in a whole semester." A soft murmur went through the audience, but Grantham didn't stop it. Isaiah went on. He showed me that law isn't only about understanding the laws. It's about not backing down when others act like you don't have any. Thank you, Mr. Winslow. Judge Grantham responded. Your comments are noted. She sighed, as if she had been holding her breath. Then she leaned forward and said something that surprised everyone in the audience. When I saw Mr. Rayner walk in today, I admit I saw a guy wearing a military medal in my courtroom, and I reacted with authority instead of judgment. That was a mistake. I was more concerned with ritual than with philosophy. The room went quiet. Not tense, just quiet. Grantham wasn't known for being introspective. Most people said she ruled with a cold hand and an iron gavel. But in that moment, her tone cracked, just enough for people to see the person behind the robe. She looked at Thurston. Mr. Rayner, I take back the contempt fine. I'm sorry I gave in the first place. Thurston bowed and looked straight at the judge. Thank you, Your Honor. She wasn't done. And I want to state on the record that the court wasn't bothered by the fact that you wore your medal with pride and dignity. It reminded it of what discipline and service looked like. There was no cheering yet. Just a lot of people in the courtroom trying to understand something unusual. A prominent figure admitting guilt without being forced to. She cleared her throat and went on. Now, this court recognizes your claim to the land. The zoning board will look at Mr. Melling's construction again, and an injunction will stay in place until then. In 30 days, there will be a formal reparation hearing. Brant looked deflated. Melling glanced at his folded hands. Thurston stayed motionless, his stance unchanging, but anybody who looked closely could feel in his shoulders. Something had lifted, not totally, just enough. Judge Grantham stood. Court is adjourned. The gavel hit the table once. Everyone rose up, but no one went right once. Isaiah stepped up to Thurston with his notebook in hand. Mr. Rayner, sir, if you ever want to teach again, even just once, I know students who will be happy to do it. Thurston grinned a little. Son, at my age, standing for too long is the real challenge. But I do like the offer. A few people came up to shake his hand. Even a city zoning official stopped to thank him for bringing up issues they had missed. Grantham slowly gathered her papers and looked across the room one last time. She walked toward the gallery and stopped near where Thurston stood. Can I talk to you alone for a minute? He looked at her and nodded. Of course. They left the courthouse and went into a quiet side corridor away from the crowd. I wasn't always like that, she remarked. Rigid. Chilly. But at some point, the robe made me forget how to listen before I did something. Thurston didn't yell at me or gloat. I've been in courtrooms where judges tore me down for breathing too loud, he remarked. Today you let the truth speak. That's more than most people. She nodded slowly and said, I hope we met for a reason. You did, he responded. To remember, but the day wasn't done. Not for Thurston. Not for anyone watching. And what happened when he stepped outside the courthouse doors would ripple further than he ever expected. The heavy doors of the courthouse swung open, and Thurston stepped outside into the fading Tulsa light. The sun had dropped just enough to cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. He paused, eyes adjusting body calm. Then he heard it, a slow, steady clap. Then another. Within seconds, a small crowd that had gathered outside, neighbors, veterans, city workers, and even a few strangers began to applaud. Not wildly, not the kind of cheer you hear at a football game, but a grounded, meaningful rhythm. The kind that says, we saw what you did, and it mattered. Thurston's granddaughter, the same girl who'd hugged him earlier, rushed over with her mother close behind. Grandpa, did you win? He looked down at her, then up at the people gathering. I didn't win, baby. I held my ground. His voice was soft, but those nearest heard it, and somehow it felt like the truest answer. The woman beside him, his daughter, gripped his arm. You didn't just hold your ground, Daddy. You reminded people that some things still matter. Truth, pride, history. Reporters started moving in closer, holding up microphones and phones. Someone asked for a quote. Someone else shouted, Mr. Rayner, how does it feel to be vindicated? He raised a hand, not to wave, but to settle the air. I'm not here to be a headline, he said. I'm here because I was tired of being ignored. I've seen enough men buried without ever getting to say their piece. And with that, he turned away from the cameras. He didn't need the spotlight. Behind him, Judge Grantham emerged through the side door. She stopped a few steps back, watching quietly. Her staff had urged her to avoid reporters, but she stayed. She needed to see it with her own eyes, the way people looked at Thurston, not with pity, but with respect. Isaiah Winslow approached cautiously. He stood just outside the circle, notebook in hand, hesitant to interrupt. Thurston noticed. "You got something you want to say?" he asked, still smiling slightly. Isaiah stepped forward. "I was thinking about something you said, about reading code books at the library. Do you still have those notes?" Thurston chuckled. "Stacked in boxes somewhere. My handwriting wasn't made for public viewing." "I'd like to scan them," Isaiah said. "Make them digital, so people can learn from you. Real students, law students, even kids in public schools. What you did today is history." Thurston studied him for a second. "You think people care about handwritten notes from some dusty old man?" "I do," Isaiah said, "and after today, a lot more will." Before Thurston could answer, a man in a suit pushed his way through the crowd. He looked flustered, holding a business card in one hand. "Mr. Rayner, I'm with the Tulsa Veterans Legacy Fund. We saw the live feed inside the courtroom. If you'd ever be willing to speak at one of our gatherings, or even advise us, we'd be honored." Thurston raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want someone who just embarrassed half the city zoning board?" The man laughed. "Exactly the kind of voice we need." Thurston glanced at his daughter, who gave a tiny nod. "I'll think about it," he said. "But I'm not putting on a suit." "You don't need to." From the edge of the crowd, an older man in a navy hat called out, "You still got those peach tree cuttings, Thurston?" Thurston smiled. "This time, for real. You bet I do. You want one?" "Hell yes," the man replied. "I'll plant it next to my porch." "You've already planted enough lessons for the whole city." Laughter rippled through the crowd, light but genuine. Someone yelled, "Semper Fi," and another waved a small American flag. It wasn't a parade. It didn't need to be. Thurston took a step down the stairs. Then another. The cameras didn't follow. The press didn't push. No one asked for another quote. Sometimes victory doesn't look like headlines or big speeches. Sometimes it looks like a quiet walk home after doing what needed to be done. But as Thurston made his way to the sidewalk, he had no idea that his story would be on the front page the next morning, and that people across the country would soon be saying his name. The next morning, the article ran in the Tulsa Tribune. Front page, top fold, black and white photo of Thurston Rayner standing on the courthouse steps, his bronze star glinting beneath the headline. Veterans Land Battle ends with apology and justice. But while the city buzzed with talk shows and social media clips dissecting the hearing, Thurston sat quietly on his back porch, sipping coffee, watching a bird peck at the grass. He wasn't scrolling. He wasn't listening to the news. He was waiting. At 9 a.m., a car pulled into his driveway. Judge Celeste Grantham stepped out. No robe, no courtroom, just a plain navy blazer, slacks, and a folder in her hand. He met her halfway. "Didn't expect a house call," he said. "I figured this was better than an email," she replied. He gestured to a chair beside his. "Hope you drink coffee." "I do," she said, settling in. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The breeze moved through the maple trees behind his fence. Then she opened a folder and pulled out a printed letter. "I wanted you to have a copy of the court's formal statement. The land is officially yours. The fine is erased. The documents are sealed and recorded." Thurston took the paper, folded it carefully, and slid it into his pocket without reading it. "Appreciate it." She looked at him. "That case reminded me of something I've forgotten." "What's that?" "That justice isn't sterile. It's not just codes and language and rules. It's human." He nodded slowly. "Most folks forget that." "I didn't just forget it," she said. "I ran from it. For years." Thurston turned slightly toward her. "Why?" Grantham stared out across the yard. I spent most of my early career trying to be respected in rooms full of people who didn't think I belonged. So I learned to be tough, uncompromising. I followed the book to the letter because I thought that would keep them from questioning me. And did it? Sometimes, she admitted, but I lost something along the way. He nodded again. Empathy? Yeah, she said. And something else. The ability to be wrong. They sat in silence for a while. She watched the bird in the yard, too. You ever think of retiring? He asked. Some days, she said. But after yesterday, I think I've got more work to do. He chuckled. You and me both. Then she turned to him more directly. I also wanted to ask you something that isn't on the record. He raised an eyebrow. All right. Would you consider sitting on a new community legal review board? We're building it next year. City funded. You wouldn't have to do much. Just weigh in on questionable zoning cases and property disputes. You sure they want someone who can't even see straight without these old glasses? They want someone who knows what justice looks like when it's been ignored. Thurston scratched his chin. You already got my mornings tied up with these peach trees. You know you could bring a basket to every meeting. She smiled. He smiled back. That's how you bribe the board, huh? No, she responded. That's how we create trust again. He thought about it for a while and then responded, Yeah, I will do that. She rose up, wiped off her clothes, and held out her hand. He shook it right away. I'm glad we met the way we did, she said. Funny, he answered. So am I? She walked back to her car and turned once before unlocking the door. And Mr. Rayner? Yes. You still can't with a medal in court, he blinked, astonished, and then she smiled. But next time, I'll wear mine too. He didn't need an answer since she drove away. He sat back down in his chair and took another sip of coffee, hearing his granddaughter's voice from the day before. Did they take the trees? No, baby, they didn't. And now they never will. But as peaceful as that morning was, the calls that started coming later that day from across the country made it clear. This story wasn't just about one man's land. It was about something far bigger. By Monday, Thurston Rayner's name had crossed state lines. It started with the local coverage. Then a clip from a hearing made it onto a national morning show. By Tuesday, veterans groups from California to Maine were calling the Tulsa courthouse, asking for a transcript. One clip in particular, Thurston saying, I didn't win. I stood my ground. Thurston stayed quiet, though. He wasn't online, didn't want interviews, and his daughter answered the phone. He turned down podcasts and cameras parked across the street. But the attention kept growing. By the end of the week, he had received hundreds of letters, including handwritten notes, emails printed and mailed, old photos, and newspaper clippings from other court battles where the outcome hadn't been so fair. Some people sent peach seeds, others medals they kept in drawers for decades, and a few just sent words. You reminded me who I used to be. They cut down your trees, but not your roots. Thank you for standing your ground so we could find ours. One letter stuck out. It was from a 17-year-old girl in Birmingham who had watched the case with her grandpa. You made me want to study law. I used to think that folks like us didn't belong in court. I have a new view on things now. You made it seem genuine. Thurston read it at the kitchen table. He read it twice, then 3 times, then put it in the inside pocket of his blazer, where the medal usually stayed. He still took care of the peach trees. He had already planted 3 new saplings in the same spot where the old ones had been cut down. His granddaughter helped him water them every other day. The soil was soft now, and the roots were taking. One morning, Isaiah Winslow came by with a tablet under his arm. I started the archive, he said, scanned your notes, added the audio from the court. People are already utilizing it at school. Thurston gazed at the computer and shook his head slowly. I never thought I'd be in someone's syllabus. You didn't just make a case in court, Isaiah added. You let people speak. Thurston and Isaiah sat on the porch for a while. Isaiah asked about old cases Thurston had worked on. Stories came easily now. About veterans denied housing because of clerical errors. About widows who'd been told their husbands' records were lost. About the nights he spent writing appeals by hand because no printer worked and the budget didn't cover repairs. Isaiah recorded some of it. With permission, the plan was to create a small digital exhibit. Voices that weren't heard until they spoke, Thurston said. Call it something shorter. Like what? Roots. Isaiah responded after thinking for a second. The city council unanimously voted to name the zoning review board after him, the Thurston Rayner Community Equity Panel. He didn't come to the event, but he did send a letter that said, "Justice is not a favor. It's a duty. I'm grateful, but I don't want monuments or plaques. Just don't ask the next quiet man who goes into a courtroom carrying the truth in his pocket to take it off before he speaks." Weeks went by, and the story was still going strong. Other cases came up, and other communities looked more closely at how land changed hands without notice. People questioned policies that had been in place for decades, but Thurston stayed the same. Every Friday, he brought a basket of fresh peaches to the local shelter. When asked why, he simply said, "Those trees owe me nothing, but I still have a lot to pay back." And that's how he lived. Quiet, clear, unshaken. If you ever stroll through the East Tulsa Community Garden on a late afternoon, you might discover a modest plaque at the rear. It doesn't stick out. It just says, "He stood his ground so others could develop." That's not just Thurston Rayner's story. It's a reminder. Sometimes the best thing a person can do is stand firm with the truth instead of fighting back with noise. If this story meant something to you, share it, speak it, and teach it. Let people know that courage doesn't always look like a battle. Sometimes it looks like an old man with a folder and a tree. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what justice should feel like human,